Of our discussion about regulation and crypto. I am delighted to be joined by, on my right, no, I'm not going to make this mistake, on my right by Archie Ravishankar, founder and the chief executive of Cogni. And I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit more about your firm as we go along, please. And sitting next to him is the man with one of the best jobs in the world because he's a regulator and a regulatory advisor in Bermuda. And next to him, Susan Friedman from Ripple Public Policy, also a lawyer in some stages. I'm really going to kick off by, and I hope we don't all agree too violently with one another. I'm going to kick off with the same first question that I asked Commissioner Pearce, which is, do we actually need any new regulations for crypto, digital, and so forth? I mean, surely the current legal regulatory framework, we deal with money laundering, we deal with fraud, we deal with misrepresentation, we deal with questions of ownership. There may be a few tweaks in here, but do we really need a whole panoply of new regulations, laws, and regulatory agencies? Start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I run a digital bank called Cogni. We are an FDIC-insured digital bank in all 50 states in America. We are the first digital bank to also launch a non-custodial wallet within a digital bank account in the US. And we serve consumers. So I do think, coming from an FDIC side, I do think that to protect the consumers, some regulations are very important, especially making sure we bank the people the right way, we disclosures on the right way to the consumers, and how we operate as a digital bank, the regulations are more important. So I think over-regulation is always a problem. And for me, crypto and blockchain is a very new area. And it could totally fundamentally change the business model on how we operate. It's just like internet in 1995, HTTP and SMTP. There was a lot of issues about, hey, do we have to encrypt websites? Because a lot of illegal activities could potentially happen. There's a lot of clarity that was required when internet became a thing. And regulations and the Commerce Act in 1995, the Digital Commerce Act in 1995 really helped commerce legal on the internet. So you could stick Amazon.com on a website, it could turn to $1 trillion company. So regulations are important, and clarity on those regulations are important.
Did we need regulations to say you have got to protect customer privacy and that you have a duty of care to customers in your operations? I mean, surely that already existed. Clearly, financial services, you couldn't go telling the world who your customers were.
Yeah, but crypto from a crypto standpoint, right? Let's say like non-custodial wallets, for example, didn't have to have KYC. You could throw a non-custodial wallet on it, right? And they could potential money laundering happen. I also sit on a board of an organization called C4ADS, which is called Center for Advanced Defense Studies, which is based in DC. C4ADS tracks everything that affects US national security, which is proliferation, terrorism, and money laundering. And we've seen this time and time again, how illicit actors use financial instruments to do illicit activities. That starts from all the way from digital gift cards, right? So regulations are certainly important, but the clarity on those regulations are important to protect the consumers and also to protect the state from harm.
And which regulations would be most helpful to you then? Which new regulations?
So for example, right now, whether it's a security or a commodity, it's going to be very important as consumers have to interoperate between their digital banking and also getting into the blockchain. Etc. So that would be very important. We are looking at launching a very unique funds flow on an exchange within a digital bank. So you could not only have your your dollar, you could actually change that into a crypto and vice versa, which happens through the payment and funds flow within the platform, right? So what kind of assets are you going to allow them to own, right? So now we're like thinking just with Bitcoin. I think you had Lightspark here, which was started by David Marcus. And we just started talking with them to see, hey, can we potentially use this for microtransactions? Because this will fundamentally change how commerce is conducted in the future. Because you had those centralized platforms that really were the gateway. They were blocking the free flow of data, and it benefited them because they had the uptake on anything that transacted through them. So if you can potentially allow the users to own their own data and allow them to potentially monetize in a much more unique way, creates a new form of payments. Okay, now Bitcoin potentially could be used as a micropayment because SEC's point of view is that officially is that it is not a security. Everything else seems to be a maybe, maybe not on a case-by-case basis. So those things are really helpful because before you start committing your product team and engineering team to start working on making those infrastructure reality.
Mourad, you and Bermuda have been working long and hard on this, actually. Well, you're one of the leaders in setting out a regulatory framework for digital transactions and so forth. Well, what's your take on that? Did you have to do significant overhaul of the laws, or?
Yeah, thank you, Philip, for the invitation. In 2018, when we set out our regulatory framework for digital assets, we really came with the view of tackling the issue of regulatory uncertainty. And to do that, we developed a new legislation with clear definitions and guiding principles that apply to digital asset businesses. Those guiding principles are aligned with the principles that you would see, within the other sectors that we regulate. But nonetheless, because we have this clear definition, which is broad, I think it provides the right foundation for entities to come and build with confidence. The BMA also has the benefit of being an integrated financial regulator. That means that we regulate banks, investment companies, insurance companies, as well as digital assets, and that provides consistency in the application, swifter decision-making, and holistic supervision. So because of the nature of digital assets that can be changing, we would come in with supervisory panels with experts from the insurance sector or the investment sector or the banking sector, depending on the nature of the services that are being offered. So I believe that the approach that we've taken is the one that within our circumstances led to the most benefits. And it is one that's really principles-based because of the dynamic nature of that industry.
And are any of the principles different or new from those that we would expect from a financial services regulator in the first place?
The principles are the same. The way that these principles apply will vary depending if you're an insurance company, an investment company, or a digital asset company. But running a prudent business, for example, is one of the core principles, and it should apply broadly. But the way that you run a prudent business in the digital asset space, with the inherent risks that are significantly different than for an investment firm, is different. So we recognize that. There are certain areas, of course, where the rules are exactly the same. For example, in terms of AML or ATF, these apply broadly. But considering even in the AML space, it's always risk-based. The way that a firm is expected to evaluate and mitigate its risk will vary, but nonetheless, the standard is generally the same.
Because the principles of authorization are based around business model, based around governance, based around customer care, based around business practices, which indeed our first speaker this morning talked about, are pretty much universal regardless of business. And indeed, a number of regulators have told me that many VASPs, crypto businesses, actually fail at that first hurdle, and that is the important thing for the regulator to concentrate on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, when we look at our own guiding principles, having proper corporate governance, skills and expertise, running a prudent business, and there's a principle around consolidated supervision to ensure that companies do not seek to avoid, proper regulation to the way they are structured. These would apply very broadly, and the way that we apply those in practice needs a lot of adaptability and conversation with the firms, but generally these would apply, in fact, to any business, whether you consider the operational resilience side or the financial resilience side.
Susan, you're on the other side of the fence dealing with the regulators. We hear from the industry repeatedly, we want regulatory clarity as an industry. We've heard a little bit about some of the areas. For Ripple, what regulatory clarity would make your life easier?
I know you were hoping for less violent agreement amongst the panelists,
Yes.
but I don't know that our asks are all that different from what we've heard before. And I think in the US, in particular, because of our definitions of what a security and a commodity are, and all the different regulators who have skin in the game, if you will, it's a question of definition. So I don't think we need new laws in the US. A lot of the proposals out there involve amendments to the Commodity Exchange Act or the Securities Acts that are out there. It's about having clear definitions of what these tokens are and creating clear sightlines between different regulatory agencies and who has control of what. And I think that's really what MiCA did. It essentially set out a taxonomy. It said, this is what the definition is of an e-money token, of an asset reference token, of a crypto asset. And if you are a CASP, and here's the definition of what that is, here's what your responsibilities are. Here are the bodies who are going to supervise you. And that sort of clarity is missing in the US. There are a number of ways that we could tackle that, including through legislation. Chair Mossad, in his congressional testimony yesterday, also discussed the possibility of creating a self-regulatory organization that is overseen by both bodies, the SEC and CFTC. So I don't think that there's, at least at this juncture, and in the US specifically, I don't think anyone's proposing wholesale rewrites of existing laws. I just also don't think it's realistic in terms of putting something totally new in place. But there is something to be said. I think what industry is calling for, and Commissioner Peirce touched on, is there just needs to be the fact that different parties are coming at the securities analysis and reaching wildly different conclusions over and over and over again suggests that there needs to be something more in the way of clarity to industry about how you define what a security is.
But in America, I mean, the president issued an executive order to essentially bring it all together. Where is that ending up?
I think that the executive order called for a number of different bodies to study and to issue policy recommendations about the crypto asset industry, and that work is underway. But I think it's clear that there isn't a broad consensus when you look at the executive branch conclusions, when you look at where Congress is at. There are, I think that it's still very much, again, as Commissioner Peirce said, a little bit of wandering in the desert as we try and find our way through.
And do you think an SRO, self-regulatory organization, is a potential way to go?
I think it's a potential way to go. There are SROs in the U.S. that have been successful, that are successful, and that do the job. I think at this point, we need to choose a path and commit and develop the regulations or the laws that support clarity for industry. I don't think anyone, I don't want to suggest, and I think there's opposition, I don't think crypto is suggesting it can govern itself without any sort of oversight. Clearly, that's not what's on the table. But all of these proposals involve either the regulatory bodies or Congress providing some guidance, and that is really what industry is calling for.
It's interesting, there's been an experiment in South Korea around self-regulatory organizations, and South Korean government seems to be pulling back from that. And of course, in the United Kingdom, 30, 40 years ago, we had SROs for financial services, and again, the regime we now have is very different from that. Talking of regimes, we have a poll which should be on your live feed, which asks, what is the most appropriate overall approach to the regulation of crypto? And please define crypto however you wish, digital assets, stable coins, anything really that isn't fiat. And we have a number of options, which I can't read for the moment on my screen, but which from memory range from everything from a comprehensive top-down bespoke regime all the way down to leaving it entirely to the market using existing laws and a very heavy caveat emptor principle. So we'll come to that. But again, let me pick up and say, who should be doing the regulating? I mean, do we want a patchwork of a combination of the courts, of statutory regulators, of industry associations, or should we go the other way and say, no, we're going to create the Crypto Regulation Agency, the CRA? Susan, let's start with you.
I will go ahead and say that having the courts create the standard in the first instance is probably the worst outcome that we can have. It's not what we want.
Why is that?
Because we have elected bodies, we have regulatory agencies. They are the ones, and in the US, we have a very well-defined processes for promulgating regulations where the public can weigh in. For Congress, there's also big opportunity for public engagement in order to make concerns known. For the courts to come in and decide, to a certain extent, it represents a failure of work being done elsewhere. And the result is, one, including in our case, it's very possible that the judge could issue a decision that only applies to Ripple, and therefore it won't be clear. There will be many other companies who are stuck in the same regulatory ambiguous state that they are today. The second is it doesn't allow for public engagement, and the best rulemaking, legislative or regulatory process involves that public output, not just from industry, but from academics, from consumers, to really have all parties weighing in, voicing their concerns to get to the best outcome possible. You just miss all of that when you have to go through the courts to reach an outcome, which again, just may not even solve the problem that affects industry.
What?
I think there's multiple ways to achieve that policy goal, and I think it would that is generally a mistake to try to get everything right entirely before moving. That can lead to paralysis. Of course, in Bermuda, we are a small jurisdiction, so we're lucky to have alignment between the government, the regulator, the politicians, the legislative branch, so that we have developed a framework, but we've kept iterating on the framework. Every year we revisit it, we make sure it's fit for purpose, and I think we are in a much different place today than we were in 2018. And I think whatever framework you're going to put in place, you will have to look at it. So I think the 5 years that we've gained actually testing it, operationalizing it, I think this is invaluable lessons. And the more you wait, trying to get everything perfect, I think it may result in something that will be imperfect anyway.
And how heavily have you involved industry in evolving that regulatory framework?
Well, for example, we've had, I believe, 3 legislative amendments to the core legislation, but we've amended our rules as well. We've published guidance. We have adapted our code of practice. We published a digital asset custody code of practice as well, with technical and business requirements that are very clear on how these assets should be safeguarded. So I think the multiple ways in which you can evolve your framework, I think should be even more reasons to kind of get going and start providing the initial certainty that the industry needs to develop. In the meantime, I think we've been able to accomplish our goals of protecting consumers, preventing financial crime, and ensuring financial stability. But if you don't act, then I think the events of 2022 have shown that there are great risks to that industry, but to society in general.
For me, I think from an infrastructure standpoint, I think regulating a protocol is tough because protocols are universal. But my opinion would be that the apps or dApps that potentially come on those protocols, because there's a lot more focus on different region, could come into some kind of regulation, whether it's going to be a gaming or it's going to be a DeFi application. Because regulating a protocol that's going to be universal, it's like regulating internet. And that's going to be, you really can't, laws across the globe are different, and regulating that, it's going to be like a very hard sell. But I think if regulation could really focus on the dApps and everything else that goes on top of the protocol, it'd be.
And do you think we're going to need a crypto version of the FSB or something at a global level that is looking across these protocols?
I think we should never. I mean, as I said, I stand by my first statement. Like, you should not have regulating at a protocol level, because each government has different viewpoints on that, and if that becomes a vicious cycle of agreeing to a lot of things, and it's never going to get done.
But if this is potentially a global business with a desire for international interoperability, at some point you need something that overreaches national laws.
Right, but how would you do it from a basic standard protocol level? Then, like, it's like regulating the internet, right? So
or regulating banking, the Basel agreements.
Banking is already regulated, right? The travel rule is applied in most countries. Like you brought up Korea. In Korea, as you know, that holding cryptocurrency is not illegal. The travel rule still applies with anything over $1,000. If you had a transfer, it has to be to a KYC'd wallet, obviously. And from a taxation standpoint, that if you hold your crypto assets and you hold it as an asset class, you will have to pay 20% tax on it. And if you're going to use crypto to buy a product or a service, then you pay the VAT on it, right? So those things already apply, but my opinion, as I said, is the hyper-localization can be regulated, but the basic components already existing, but trying to over-regulate the basic protocol will not yield any good results.
Right, so that's an interesting hybrid. Do we have questions in the House? Yes, Vanessa.
I'll ask, what are your thoughts just more broadly in terms of Web3 and sort of how to adapt frameworks kind of for that broader vision? I know Archie in particular, your company, I think on the website has like Web3 as a particular call out to it. And so just thinking beyond sort of the financial impact, but those commerce impacts of that next version.
I really started Cogni because I felt that discretionary spend happens at the banking layer, and it ends up going to the internet tooling ecosystem where centralized platforms have a control on the uptake of anything that goes through them, which means that you could actually capture that. Users need to own the data. Users should be able to find different ways to consume product, service, and content, which unfortunately is not possible within the Web2 space. And if you could take that data and move them into the Web3 where they have full control of their information and data set, you could create a new lines of distribution of products, service, and content, which we are super bullish on, excited about, because even the entire marketing and community building is going to fundamentally change within the Web3 space. So that's where we are super bullish on. We look at banking as a platform for them to hold their dollars, where they can receive their deposits, but anything on the social side, the commerce side, if they could take that data and they can own it, we can disrupt the way traditional centralized FANGs have been operating. And we are very keen to we are very, very keen to innovate in that space. But as I said, going back to it, the payment system, which is a payment system to use? Should we use Bitcoin, or should we use Polygon's been, hey, you should use us or Solana? But when there is a regulatory unclarity, how do you help with the reconciliation to happen? So that is where the question mark comes in play. But our thesis is that Web3 will fundamentally change the consumer's aspect of consuming product, service, and content.
Well, have you thought about Web3 and metaverse in your regulatory approach?
I mean, from a regulatory standpoint, I think, our principles are high level enough that we would welcome, especially within a sandbox environment, kind of developers and entrepreneurs that will have a better view of the risk associated with that, so that then we can inform potentially guidance on the right way to run this type of business. But I can't say that we're at this stage where we are ready to issue specific guidelines for that. One of the things that we do believe at the BMA is hands-on learning. So we do have Oculus that sits within our FinTech lab, and we do play around with the technology, but I think it's still early stages.
Just as a side issue, do you think the metaverse is now being sidelined by ChatGPT and AI, or do you think the two will exist in parallel?
Again, that's a regulator view, but I think they will combine, and you combine that with blockchain, and you can start putting AI on smart contracts. You start looking at the world that could be significantly different than today.
Yes, for a regulator, that's a great challenge. Susan, where?
I think the U.S. needs to figure out some threshold questions before we get to the wider Web3 universe. I think the EU in particular will be interesting to watch post-MiCA as they start to think through these issues, and they're going to be, I think, much more forward-leaning and working in this space, and that debate, I think, will help inform some of the other jurisdictions as they confront it as well.
And what's your take on the state of crypto regulation and so forth in the United Kingdom? I mean, we yesterday had a senior civil servant outlining Her Majesty's government's view that we're going to become the vibrant crypto hub of the universe, and clearly we have 2,000 years of common law here, which tends to work quite well. What's your view of the framework in the UK?
I think it's hugely encouraging. I think the UK has been very clear that they're not looking to be the first mover, and so they're looking at MiCA and trying to figure out what could work, what isn't. In addition to global frameworks, I think that helped inform the consultation. But they're starting from the right place. They put forth a very clear taxonomy of how different assets should be defined. They are talking about the phases in which they're going to tackle the different stable coins and then central actors. I think they're charting a path. They're drawing lessons from other jurisdictions. They're thinking about equivalence, and I think it's the right step. And overlaid on top of all of that, which is missing in the US, is that enthusiasm for the tech and the space and development of the industry. I mean, that is the differential, and that's what's going to move the needle in the UK.
Can I ask both you and Archie, I mean, there has over recent years been a certain amount of competition between jurisdictions to attract crypto digital businesses, and a certain amount of regulatory arbitrage. I mean, as senior private sector counsel, how important is that in your decision as to where you're going to base your and conduct your activities?
We don't look to, we're not looking to exploit arbitrage opportunities is probably the easiest way to frame it. But I do think, and our CEO has been clear, I think the facts already bear this out, which is that the the movement in crypto is global. It's not happening in the US. And innovators and industry players and VCs, they're moving to other jurisdictions where those landscapes are clear. I do think there's already work in train to help not create equivalence amongst regulatory standards, but to harmonize them. So I think those opportunities to take advantage of where there are gaps are going to become smaller and smaller over time. And at the end of the day, the advantage is going to go to the jurisdictions that have very clear rules of the road and where you understand what your obligations are, where you go into them. Already we're seeing migration of industry players and funds to jurisdictions like Europe. I think once the UK has its framework in place, you're going to see that competition really unfold between them, but it should create hopefully a healthy competitive ecosystem.
Archie, how do you see it?
We are staying put in the United States. We're not moving anywhere. I mean, we are a digital bank. We're currently building mostly infrastructure for Web3 so that people could interoperate. So we've been doing everything.
And is that because the United States is a great source of capital and investment, and it is the world's largest market, or do you think the regulation?
Combination of few. As you know, the amount of crypto funds that have been raised last year, I mean, Andreessen has a $4.6 billion fund. Horn Ventures raised about $1.3 billion, but less than 20% has been deployed. The amount of capital that's there is just quite staggering. The market is also massive. And for us, we felt that every time, I mean, we were not a native Web3 company. We were a Web2 fintech moving into the Web3, and there are a few things that we did that allows us to stay on the right side of the regulators as of now. So when Commissioner Pierce asked us, it's amazing that you guys launched a non-custodial wallet within a bank account. So there are a few things that we did that allows us to do it. So you can only get a non-custodial wallet when you do a KYC, so you get a bank account and a non-custodial wallet. So we take all the KYC data and move them as a non-transferable NFT within the wallet, and the soul-bound tokens are only valid for a year because of the AML, PEP sanctions, and OFAC regulations. So we put all the travel rules in place, and we allow the data to be moved from Web2 to Web3. So we've been really building that infrastructure than just going full blast. We've been still testing it. Because we think we're very bullish that the regulation will come into play very soon in the United States, and we want to be there to capitalize on the opportunity.
Thank you. Final question. Oh, I've got my poll answers here. So what is the most appropriate overall approach to the regulation of crypto? About a third think we need a top-down bespoke regulatory umbrella. And just under a fifth think of a bottom-up bespoke regulation. I start with the individual stuff and work upwards. 40% selective adjustments to existing regulation. Big fascination for me here is 5% for SROs. Nobody thinks it should be left to the market. Now, that may be because of the nature of the audience, but we're all terribly risk-averse. And at that point, people are signaling violently to me to say that we're running out of time. I would like to thank you, to Susan Friedman from Ripple, Mad Fahmy from Bermuda, the Bermuda Monetary Authority, and Archie from Cognate, which I think we're going to hear a lot more about in the future. So thank you all very much indeed for joining me. It's been a fascinating conversation.